this is a good transition to the specific facts of what we know about this classified material. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. And it stems from a story that broke in February of 2022, earlier this year. The recovery of 15 boxes. The National Archives chartered a plane, flew down to Mar-a-Lago, and recovered 15 boxes from Mar-a-Lago. That included, from what we know, letters from Barack Obama, from Kim Jong-un, and it underscored the previous administration's cavalier handling of presidential records. Now, according to what we know about this, is that the Presidential Records Act actually requires the president and his aides, in order to preserve all possibly both classified, unclassified, historically important information, including also the private communications of the president, memos, and any other contemporary notes that he may have taken for both historical purposes, but also to preserve the record, for all time, specifically for cases like this. What we also know about that is that the inventory list of that has come out and been described as, in the unclassified section, occupying 100 pages. So 100 pages was the inventory list, not necessarily the boxes themselves, Krystal. The other important part is that the classified materials section, currently, if they were to use the same listing standard, and I know this is getting boring, would occupy approximately 3 pages, the inventory list itself, as in X document, Y document, etc. So we don't actually know the amount of materials, but if the classified materials list were to look the same as the unclassified materials list, it would be approximately 3 pages out of the 100 pages that have already been taken out of Mar-a-Lago. Now, the search warrant, if it were to relate to this and were to be an extension, would then also indicate to us that the National Archives could prove to the FBI, to prosecutors, and to others that their investigation and that their attempt in order to get back all classified and unclassified materials from the former president's residence was then unsuccessful. And also prosecutors, let's go to this next part up on the screen, 2 months ago were already probing these actual classified materials and the handling of it. Now, on this, it is important to also underscore why and how and the actual circumstances through which it would matter. Simply taking classified materials is not necessarily a violation of the Presidential Records Act at a criminal level. What prosecutors would have had to prove, and this article is from May of 2022, what they lay out, in actual crime was committed, is they would have to prove that the president or somebody around him knowingly and selectively took classified materials and knowingly did so in violation of the Presidential Records Act. Now, Trump himself did himself no favors. Part of the reason why is that because Trump did not want to admit that he had lost the election. So there was a hurried and frenzied attempt in order to gather these materials. The process that should have been gone through in order to do so was not done. Now we get to the question of classified material itself, which I'm sure many people are wondering. The president is ultimately the determiner of classification, as in the president of the United States basically can declassify whatever he wants. He could take the most top secret documents inside of the US military and declassify it tomorrow and simply publish it. That's how it works in our chain of command. Now the question becomes, did he declassify those documents to make them unclassified whenever he took them? Now, here we have a little bit of interesting reporting, which is months ago, Kash Patel, who is an attorney, he's been in and out of the White House, he's very much so involved in not only Stop the Steal information, but others. He actually spoke to Breitbart News. And in that article, what he describes is that, yes, these classified materials were already declassified, but he admits that the White House counsel's office had not updated the classification markings on some of these documents. Here's what he says, quote, Trump declassified whole sets of materials in anticipation of leaving government that he thought the American public should have the right to read for themselves. The White House counsel failed to generate the paperwork to change the classification markings, but that doesn't mean that the information wasn't declassified. I was there with President Trump when he said, we are declassifying this information. He was saying at that time, the story is just another disinformation campaign designed to break the public trust in the president that has lived on transparency. So I believe that some of this will come down to a major fight, and this also stems back to May. That's when this story was written. So we're going off what we have so far in the public record, which is that such that there could be so-called violation of the Presidential Records Act on this classification, that it will come down to a fight of actual classification authority by President Trump, whether the process was followed, whether he knowingly, and the Justice Department had to prove that he knowingly circumvented and selectively tried in order to circumvent the Presidential Records Act, which could be why they rated as safe, right? Because it didn't end up in those boxes. And then it will ultimately, I believe, if all of this stems from, and again, this is only based upon what we know, will come down to this matter of classification authority, whether it was the White House counsel's fault, whether Trump, whether they overlooked it, whether he knowingly circumvented it, and this will be a central part. So as I was saying, just like with the Hillary emails thing, we all learned, who exactly installed the server in Hillary's house, Huma Abedin's access to the server, whether the server had been pinged, exactly the location the server was located, the exact emails of such. So everybody buckle up, because we're all going to become very familiar with classification law, declassification authority, the White House counsel's process of declassifying said documents, the Presidential Records Act, the National Archives, what has to be preserved, what doesn't have to be preserved, and what rises to the level of criminality under the Presidential Records Act. So that's where we stand right now.
Yes. I mean, potentially, or this is an entree to broader investigations.
Yes, right.
And again, the reporting we have so far does not rule out that additionally in this warrant, there was, that this touched other investigations, that it wasn't just the Presidential Records Act. So I'm just really reserving judgment in a lot of ways, because it's so early. Now, you would think, as you were saying, Saagar, that if they were willing to take this historic, unprecedented action, that they would have the goods, that they would have him dead to rights, that it would be clear as possible. That would be the expectation. But again, at this point, we just don't know. So, we're going to play some of the reaction on Fox News, which was really, very telling in a lot of ways. They've automatically decided without knowing anything whatsoever that, of course, he did nothing wrong, and of course, this is abuse of power and all this stuff. An immediate rush to judgment. Of course, we just don't have the facts at this point to know whether they really had the goods, whether it's really justified to take what is, by any account, an extraordinary action here. Just to read to you about, specifically on the Presidential Records Act stuff, which doesn't just pertain to classified documents, but of course the classified data, that's the most sensitive, that's the most potentially problematic area. They talked to an expert in one of these articles who said typically records preservation proceeds by mutual agreement with the occupant of the White House staff and archivists, quote, but if there is willful and unlawful intent to violate the law, then the picture changes, with penalties of up to 3 years in jail for individuals who willfully conceal or destroy public records. Quote, you can't prosecute for just tearing up papers, he said of Trump. You would have to show him being highly selective and have evidence that he wanted to behave unlawfully. So like, a little mistake. There was reporting yesterday, again, this is again Maggie Haberman reporting about how he would tear up the documents and flush them down the toilet, and she had pictures yesterday of partially flushed documents in toilets, various toilets around the White House. So just that alone is actually not enough.
Yes.
You have to have that, and you have to have the proof that he knew this was wrong and was intentionally violating the law for this to actually be a criminal act.
Bingo. And that's what it will all come down to, the circumstances. And look, to prove something like this is extraordinary. You can't just really rely on witness testimony. You kind of have to either have like a written record, phone call, some sort of other evidence, especially when we're talking about the former president. So I think you're right. We should all just reserve the fact that we actually don't really know all that much about this. One interesting thing is that Trump actually did receive a copy of the warrant whenever, or at least one of his representatives. That would at least lay out some of what they were looking for.
100%.
Frankly, I think he should publish it. If it's a witch hunt and all of this, we should know. I mean, part of the maddening thing around all of this is that given how high profile and public the former president is, the political ramifications, is we just simply have no clue about what's happening with the investigation. And we're going to get to, the calls for the GOP reaction on an investigation and more. But I think the facts of the matter are just more important than ever when we're discussing, because otherwise people can jump to some wild conclusions, which I'm already beginning to see.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.